Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers. What if everything known could never be truly known? What if the questions that keep us up at night are the very ones that cannot and will not ever be resolved? That's the strange and quiet tragedy of tonight's story. This is not about finding answers. It's about the haunting beauty of questions with none. If you enjoy falling asleep to deep thoughts that drift like candle smoke, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post every single night, so there's always a new story waiting for you. And let us know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from and what city your thoughts sleep in. Now, let the candle burn slowly. Let's begin. There's a wordless tension in the way people live, a quiet scratch beneath the surface. We build entire worlds out of answers, yet forget that most of our lives are shaped by questions that resist them. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does time feel like a river, even if physics says it isn't? Why does anything matter if one day no one will remember any of this? These questions sit at the heart of human consciousness, and still they twist, still they burn. There's an ancient thought experiment called Plato's Cave. Maybe you've heard it. Imagine prisoners chained in a cave, staring at a wall. Behind them, puppeteers pass objects in front of a fire, casting shadows. The prisoners see only the shadows and believe them to be the real world. One man escapes. He stumbles into the light. The real world is too bright. It hurts his eyes, but he learns. He sees. He understands that the shadows were lies. He returns to tell the others, but they don't believe him. They hate him for breaking the illusion. Why? Because it's safer to trust the wall than face the blinding light of uncertainty. And this is the first unanswerable question. What is reality, really? Is it what we perceive, or something behind perception? René Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." But even that only proves that the self exists, not the world around it. What if the world is a simulation? What if it's all a dream? Solipsism, the idea that only the self can be known to exist, is not disprovable. Everything else, voices, colours, memories, faces, might just be a complex hallucination. The philosopher George Berkeley went further. He believed that reality only exists when it is perceived, that a tree falling in a forest with no one to hear it makes no sound at all, not even in principle. So what is the self, if the world might not be real? Another question with no answer. The ship of Theseus poses it gently. If you replace every plank of a ship, piece by piece, is it still the same ship? And if you reconstruct the original plank somewhere else, which one is the real one? Apply that to a person. You've shed your cells, you've forgotten half your memories, you've changed beliefs, opinions, friends, dreams. Are you the same person who watched cartoons in a blanket fort? Or are you someone else wearing their memories like a mask? Identity, like reality, is a flickering candle. And then there's morality, a world that doesn't agree on what is good or bad. One tribe honors death, another mourns it. One calls a man a hero, another calls him a war criminal. Nietzsche said, "There are no moral phenomena, only moral interpretations." But if that's true, how do we judge anything? The trolley problem asks it simply. A train is rushing toward 5 people. Pull a lever, and you'll divert it onto a track where only one person stands. Do you pull it? Most say yes. But now imagine you must push someone in front of the train to stop it. Same numbers, different method. Suddenly the answer changes. Why? The numbers haven't. But the blood is on your hands now. It's not about logic, it's about guilt. It's about the deep emotional undercurrent beneath our ethics. And that leads to a darker question. What if free will doesn't exist? What if every thought, every choice, every sin and act of kindness was just the result of neurons firing from causes set in motion long before birth? Determinism says we're just puppets, soft machinery playing out a script. But if that's true, can anyone be blamed? Can anyone be praised? The neuroscientist Benjamin Libet showed that the brain decides to act before the conscious mind becomes aware of it. A delay, barely a second, but enough to shake the foundation. Are we just narrating choices we never truly made? And yet, we still feel free. We still feel guilt. We still regret. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychologist, said that even in the face of total oppression, man can choose his attitude. That space between stimulus and response is where our freedom lies. But is it a trick of the brain, or something real and sacred? The question remains unanswered. Now close your eyes. Imagine the stars, billions of them, and now realize they are not fixed, they are dead or dying. Their light is just arriving. The night sky is an obituary written in real time. So what is time truly? Einstein said time is relative. That simultaneity is an illusion. There is no universal now, just sequences of cause and effect depending on where and how one moves. So does the past still exist? Does the future? Some physicists believe time is a block, every moment already laid out, past and future like pages in a book. Others believe it's an illusion created by entropy. But if time is not flowing, then who is doing the moving? These are not questions with answers. They are mirrors. And in those mirrors, the self flickers, trembles, vanishes, meaning collapses like a paper star. And yet, people still wake up. They still fall in love. They still write songs about the moon. Maybe that's the final question. If nothing can be proven, if identity is fluid, if morality is contextual and time isn't real, why do people still care so deeply about being good? Why do they still cry at movies? Why do they still whisper, "I love you," like it means something that will last? These questions may have no answers, but maybe it's the asking that makes us human. The ache of wonder, the stubbornness of meaning, the soft rebellion of caring anyway. So keep asking, keep watching, and let the questions lull you into sleep. Somewhere in the back of the mind, beneath the logic and memory, beneath the sound of language and the shape of numbers, there lingers a silent doubt. Not loud enough to panic, just enough to hum. A soft, wordless suspicion that something isn't quite right, not with the world, but with the very act of knowing the world. What is knowledge, if every truth can be doubted? This is the paradox Descartes tried to escape, only to find himself trapped inside it. He stripped everything away, senses, perceptions, even his body, until all that remained was the fact that he was thinking. But thinking about what? And if the mind alone is certain, how can it know anything beyond itself? This leads to epistemology, the study of knowledge, but it also leads nowhere. Because for every answer about what can be known, there's a deeper doubt, a louder silence, a darker corner. And so we ask, how do we know that what we believe is real? Not just in terms of objects and space, but ideas and morals, identities and roles. Consider belief itself. Most people believe what they believe not because they discovered it, but because they inherited it. They were born into a family, a culture, a language, and the beliefs that shaped them were shaped by people just as uncertain, just as trapped in their time. There is a theory in psychology called the illusory truth effect. The more often something is repeated, the more true it feels. Not is, feels. This is how propaganda works. It's how falsehoods become folklore. It's how entire civilizations die for lies. We don't believe because of evidence. We believe because of repetition, because of rhythm, because of how well a story fits into the shape of our fear. And if that is true, then belief is not a matter of reason. It is a matter of habit. A comforting illusion we wrap around ourselves to stay warm in a cold and indifferent universe. But if belief is fragile, then what about truth? Is there such a thing? Absolute truth, or only versions, angles, edited fragments of something unreachable? Nietzsche wrote that there are no facts, only interpretations. That truth is just a mobile army of metaphors. Words we forgot were once poetic. Every culture, every age, rewrites what it thinks is true. The earth was flat until it wasn't. The sun revolved around us until it didn't. Madness was once divine. Slavery was once normal. Women were once property. The truth changes. So, was it ever truth to begin with? Or just consensus, crumbling like an old cathedral, stone by stone? The next question lies in ethics, not whether something is good or bad, but what good even means. Is it pleasure? Is it duty? Is it survival? Jeremy Bentham believed in utilitarianism, the greatest happiness for the greatest number. But this leads to horror, doesn't it? Sacrifice one to save 10. Remove the inconvenient. Trade lives like currency. Kant rejected this. He said people must never be used as means to an end. That morality must be universal, objective, unbreakable. But even Kant never had to pull a lever on a trolley, or lie to protect someone from death. And so, the paradox returns. Ethics that are too flexible become monstrous. Ethics that are too rigid become inhuman. What then is good? Is it what makes life flourish? Is it what prevents suffering? But whose suffering? Whose life? A mosquito feeds on blood to live. A man swats it dead to avoid a bite. Who is wrong? What if neither is? What if the idea of morality is simply an adaptation, a tool for social cohesion, born not of heaven, but of evolution? Game theory, mirror neurons, oxytocin, these are the molecules of what we call goodness. Does that make it less sacred, or more? And then there is the future. What does it mean to imagine a time that doesn't exist yet? To plan, to hope, to fear it? The future is a strange beast. It does not exist in any physical sense, yet it rules us. People work decades for retirements they may never see. They suffer today for a tomorrow that may never arrive. They wait, postpone, defer, always expecting that life will begin later. But what is later if not a grave in disguise? Heidegger called this being toward death, that our whole existence is shaped by the knowledge that we will cease to be. It is not the fear of death that shapes us, but the structure it gives to time. Every decision becomes meaningful because we know it ends. But that same knowledge haunts. How can anything matter if everything ends? This is the foundation of nihilism, the quiet scream that says nothing is real, nothing is permanent, nothing is worth the pain. But even nihilism contradicts itself, because to say that nothing matters is to care, isn't it? Camus wrote about the absurd, that tension between our need for meaning and a universe that offers none. And his answer was not despair, but rebellion. To imagine Sisyphus happy, to live without why, to love the brief spark of life for its own sake, like a candle that knows it will be snuffed. But what if even rebellion is meaningless? What if we are just patterns, biological puppets moved by DNA and dopamine? Is there a soul, or just a brain pretending to be one? Neuroscience has never found a mind, only electrochemical storms in meat. But consciousness feels like more than that. We love, we dream, we suffer, we laugh at absurd things, we feel shame when no one is watching. Is that just neurons or something more? The hard problem of consciousness asks why experience exists at all. Why anything feels like anything. Why pain feels like pain. Why red looks like red. Why the mind exists instead of just matter. And no one can answer it. Not yet, maybe not ever. Some say consciousness is fundamental, that it is not an emergent property, but a building block of reality, that we are not brains in meat sacks, but awareness in temporary vessels. Panpsychism, they call it. The idea that everything has mind, in some small way, even rocks, even light. But if everything is conscious, what does that mean? Are we speaking to the world when we cry into the night, or just to ourselves? If consciousness is everywhere, is death a lie? Is separation an illusion? Or are these just stories carved into the fog, vanishing before they settle? And so the questions remain, like stars that burn out before their light arrives, like dreams we forget the moment we open our eyes. Questions about who we are and why, about whether the soul is real, about whether the universe is personal or just a vast accident, about whether love matters even if it fades, whether kindness means anything if all of us return to dust, whether memory makes us or breaks us, whether the mind can ever escape its own mirror. These are not questions that end. They do not resolve. They linger, like smoke, like grief, like a melody remembered in a dream. This is what it means to be human, to ache for answers that never come, and to live as if they do anyway. And then there's the question of time, not how it ticks, but why it feels the way it does. Why childhood summers stretch like golden oceans and adult years vanish like smoke in the wind. Einstein said time is relative, and physics confirms it. The faster one moves, the slower time passes for them. Gravity bends time. Light reveals its limits. But that doesn't explain why memories bend it too. Why joy speeds up a day. Why grief slows down a minute. Why a single second of silence after bad news can feel like an entire hour pressed into the ribs. So what is time really? Is it just a way of measuring change or something deeper? Augustine of Hippo once wrote, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know, but if I wish to explain it, I do not." Time remains one of the strangest questions. We cannot see it, hold it, or stop it, yet we build our entire lives around it. Clocks, calendars, anniversaries, deadlines, birthdays that feel like trophies or traps. The future, always imagined but never reached. The past, always receding but never truly gone. Some physicists believe that all moments, past, present, future, exist simultaneously, like pages in a book, already written. We just move through them one by one. If that's true, then every mistake is eternal. Every kiss is still happening. Every goodbye, still echoing. But if everything already exists, does choice mean anything? Does regret? The Stoics believed in fate, but not in despair. They taught that while we cannot control events, we can control how we respond. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But if the reaction is also predetermined, what then? Free will vanishes like breath on a cold mirror. Still, people insist they choose. Even if choice is just an illusion, it's one we cannot live without. Without it, morality dissolves. Law becomes theatre. Praise becomes nonsense. And yet studies show our brains make decisions before we are aware of them. Neuroscience records the electrical signals of choice, milliseconds, before the thought enters consciousness. Are we just narrators of a play already in motion? If so, who wrote the script? And can it be rewritten? There's a quiet panic in that idea, that the most intimate parts of us, our dreams, our confessions, our secret shames, are just outcomes of chemicals colliding in soft matter. But even if we accept determinism, another question emerges. Why do we remember the past but not the future? The laws of physics don't require time to move one way. They are time symmetric. Yet we only ever fall forward. Why? Entropy offers one explanation. The universe moves from order to disorder. But why does our consciousness align with that direction? Why do we age, but never unage? Why do we mourn the past, fear the future, and ignore the miracle of the present? Buddhism speaks of this, the now, as the only real moment, that the past is memory, the future is imagination, and only the now can be lived. But the now is slippery. Try to hold it, and it's already gone. So how many nows make a life? How many tiny awarenesses add up to a self? That brings us back to the mirror. The self. The mind asking these questions. Who is the thinker behind the thought? Most people believe in a core self, a personality, an identity, a soul, but modern psychology suggests otherwise. The self is a bundle of experiences, memories, and shifting narratives. A collage, a performance. David Hume wrote that when he looked inward, he found no self, only a stream of sensations. No thinker, just thoughts. No core, just fragments. If that's true, then who are we really? The person who cried in the kitchen last year? The one who laughed too loud last night? The one thinking this sentence right now? Theseus's ship asks again, if every part changes, is it still the same ship? If every cell in the body replaces itself, is it still the same person? Or are we a river pretending to be a stone? This question grows louder with technology. What happens if you upload a brain? If every neuron, every synapse is copied perfectly, does the copy become you? If not, why not? What is the I that survives transfer? And if the copy wakes up and believes it's you, who are you now? Dead? Duplicated? Forgotten? The fear isn't just about dying, it's about disappearing. Being replaced by something that wears your memories like a costume? So is memory the soul? Or is the soul just a myth we made up to make loss bearable? There's no answer, just the ache of the question. And that ache lives everywhere, in politics, in religion, in love, in the way people cling to certainty, as if belief were a raft and doubt the sea. But certainty is a dangerous comfort. It hardens, it blinds, it whispers that it has found the final truth, when truth was never meant to be caught. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of this, that the danger is not doubt, but dogma, that when a man believes he knows the truth, he becomes capable of cruelty in its name. Truth, he said, must be a woman, a mystery, elusive, seductive, never possessed. And yet people want possession. They want to own meaning, to stamp it into coins and laws and scriptures. But meaning is wild. It grows in silence, in art, in the space between people. It cannot be pinned, and perhaps that's the strangest question of all. Why do humans long for meaning so deeply, when the universe offers none? Stars burn without caring, mountains crumble without mourning. Evolution favors survival, not significance. Yet humans write poetry. They cry at sunsets. They hold hands at funerals. Why? What is this hunger for purpose, if there is no food to satisfy it? Camus called it the absurd, and he said we must imagine Sisyphus happy, that to live without meaning is not to die, but to be free, to create meaning, even knowing it will be erased, like a monk sweeping sand in a Zen garden, knowing the wind will undo it. That's the rebellion. That's the art. That's the reason. Maybe. But even that is just another story. A beautiful one. A soft one. One we tell ourselves to sleep. Just like this. And yet the ache continues, winding its way through every corner of the human mind. Through language, through desire, through silence. What is language, if not a fragile bridge between inner worlds? A clumsy attempt to share what cannot be seen. Words are symbols, not truths. They point, but they do not touch. The word pain is not pain. The word love is not love. They are shadows on the cave wall. Echoes of something more real, more raw, more unnameable. Ludwig Wittgenstein once said that the limits of language are the limits of our world. And so what lies beyond? What is lost in what cannot be said? Every time someone fails to express themselves, every time a feeling is too complex to be spoken, it slips into that space beyond the border. And that is where much of life exists, outside words. We fall in love without knowing why. We mourn without having language for the shape of the whole. We are moved by music, by scent, by memories that live only as flashes, never sentences. Is truth then only what can be described? Or is truth what moves us without explanation? Science gives us facts but not meaning. Poetry gives us meaning but not proof. And between the two we drift. Some things are true not because they are logical, but because they feel lived. A moment of kindness in a cruel place. A decision made at the edge of despair. These cannot be charted, they can only be felt. And feeling brings us to the next impossible question. What is emotion? Is it chemical, electrical, evolutionary, or something more mysterious? Why does a song from years ago make tears rise without consent? Why does the smell of an old shirt bring back the ghost of someone who left? Why do we feel guilt for things no one remembers and pride for things no one saw? Emotions do not obey logic. They follow their own weather, shaped by winds we cannot predict. A child fears the dark, though nothing is there. An adult fears a phone call, though it is just a voice. What is fear, if not imagination, turned against itself? What is hope, if not the same tool turned toward light? And if emotions can be wrong, can they be trusted? But if they cannot be trusted, what else is left? Descartes trusted thought. Spinoza trusted order. Pascal trusted the heart. He wrote, "The heart has its reasons, which reason does not know." And in that tension between logic and longing, we find the question of faith. Not religion, necessarily. Faith, the leap, the surrender, the choice to believe in what cannot be seen. Kierkegaard called it the leap of faith, the decision to live as if the world has meaning, even if no proof can confirm it. He saw faith not as certainty, but as trembling, a dance on the edge of the abyss. Faith in this sense is not weakness, it is bravery, but it is also blindness, because faith can lead anywhere, into beauty or into terror, into love or into fanaticism. And so we ask, how do we know what to trust? Our senses deceive, our minds hallucinate, our culture programs, our emotions sway, our beliefs entrench. If everything can mislead, then what is the compass? Is there a compass at all? Or are we just wandering? Sartre believed that existence precedes essence, that we are not born with a purpose but must create it, that freedom is total and therefore terrifying. With no script, no divine plan, we are authors without outline. And yet, even Sartre admitted, most people flee from this freedom. They choose bad faith, the lie that someone else is in charge, that life has a preset direction, that they do not have to choose. But not choosing is also a choice. Every ignored calling, every avoided truth, every moment passed in sleepwalking, these accumulate, they shape a life. And one day, perhaps too late, the question arrives. Was any of it real? Did I live? Or did I just perform life? For others? For safety? For comfort? And this raises another unanswerable question. What is authenticity? How do we know when we are being true to ourselves, if the self is always changing? How can we live authentically if we are always acting on stages, wearing masks, adapting to rooms, to roles, to rules? Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the social face we wear, and the shadow, the parts we hide. He warned that without facing the shadow, we cannot be whole. But facing it is frightening. It means admitting cruelty, envy, lust, cowardice. It means acknowledging the parts of ourselves we pretend do not exist. So most never do. They split, they perform, they play the good parent, the strong partner, the loyal friend, while a deeper truth waits, unspoken. Is it still truth, if it is never spoken? Or does it rot into myth, then madness? The mind cannot bury forever. What we repress returns, in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in strange behaviour we cannot explain. So, are we really in control? Or are we passengers, watching the wheel turn without touching it? Freud believed we are driven by unconscious desires. Jung believed we are guided by archetypes. Behaviourists believe we are shaped by reinforcement. Evolutionary psychologists believe we are puppets of ancient instincts. So who, if anyone, is steering? If a man gives to charity for praise, is it still good? If a woman loves because she fears loneliness, is it still love? If someone prays out of habit, not belief, is it still faith? And if we can never know our deepest motives, can we ever say we are free? These questions wind deeper into the labyrinth. They spiral, they echo, and at the centre is the minotaur of death, not as horror, but as finality. The end of questions, the ultimate silence. What happens after? Every culture has answered, every answer contradicts. Rebirth, heaven, void, judgment, release, memory, nothing. Some say death is a wall, others a door, some a dreamless sleep, others the return home. But no one knows, and not knowing shapes life more than any answer. It haunts, it humbles, it sharpens beauty and magnifies fear. A flower is only beautiful because it will wilt. A day is only precious because it ends. Death is what gives weight to life, but also what steals its meaning. If everything ends, what was the point? This is not a question to solve, only one to sit with, like a candle in a dark room, flickering, fragile, but enough to see by. Still the candle burns, smaller now, quieter, but still burning, and the questions keep circling, like moths around its fragile light. Death has no answer, only echoes. And those echoes find their way into everything we touch, into art, into ethics, into love, especially love. What is it really? Biologically, it's oxytocin, dopamine, limbic circuits that evolved to help helpless infants survive. But biologically doesn't explain poetry. It doesn't explain the songs written to no one. The way someone's absence takes up more space than their presence ever did. The way the smell of a worn t-shirt can collapse years into seconds. The way heartbreak feels physical, as if the body itself is breaking in tandem with the illusion. So what is love? Is it real? Or is it a lie we need to survive the unbearable loneliness of being separate minds in separate bodies? Erich Fromm believed love is not a feeling but an action, a practice, a discipline. Something you do, not fall into. That real love requires effort, patience, humility. But that's not what the world sells. The world sells romance as rescue, completion, merging. Two halves becoming one. But if that were true, what happens when they drift? When they grow in different directions? Does love have an expiration date? If so, was it ever love to begin with? Or just projection? We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the idea of them, with who we are when we are seen. And often that idea is false. We imagine someone who listens, who understands, who saves. We fill in their silence with our own desires, and when they fail to match the dream, we call it betrayal. But perhaps the betrayal was our own. Expecting someone else to complete a puzzle we haven't solved ourselves. And so comes the next question. Can anyone truly be known? We see faces, gestures, habits. We hear voices, stories, apologies. But these are surfaces, masks. No one can enter another person's mind. Not fully, not ever. Every relationship is a guess, a best approximation. And often we mistake closeness for understanding. We assume that time equals truth, that familiarity means access. But the self is not static. It shifts, it hides, it contradicts. A friend can become a stranger in a single sentence. A parent can become unknown in a moment of honesty. A lover can disappear inside the silence of what they cannot say. So if no one can be truly known, can anyone be truly loved? Or are we always loving projections, ideas, memories, moments? And if love depends on illusion, is it still beautiful? Or does the illusion make it sacred? There's a paradox in intimacy. The closer we get, the more we risk seeing the parts we'd rather not. The flaws, the fears, the wounds. And yet, it is only through this rawness that real connection becomes possible. Only through the courage to be ugly, wrong, unfinished. But most people never go that far. They stay in the safe shallows and call it love, and then wonder why it fades. What is it that fades really? The novelty? The story? Or the mask we could no longer hold up? And if love ends, does that mean it was never true? Or does impermanence make it more true? Like a flower that blooms for a single day, or a meteor that burns so brightly it cannot last. Alan Watts said, trying to hold on to love is like trying to grasp water. You can't do it by squeezing. You can only cup your hands and let it rest there. But even water slips through fingers. So is all love destined to become loss? And if it is, why do we still seek it, still long for it, still define our lives by who we've loved and who left? Is it because the alternative is too terrifying? To be untouched, unneeded, unknown? Or is it because in those fleeting moments of connection, something real flickers through the illusion? Something we cannot name but cannot live without? Some say love is the only real thing, that everything else is distraction, that when we love, we glimpse the divine, the infinite, the timeless. But even that idea raises questions. If love is real, why does it cause so much pain? Why does it vanish when tested? Why do people betray the very thing they swore to protect? And why do we love people who do not love us back? What does that say about love, or about us? Perhaps love is not something that happens between people. Perhaps it is something that happens within us, and others merely awaken it. If so, does that mean we can love someone who no longer exists? Who never really existed? Can we love a memory, a possibility, an illusion? And if the love felt real, does it matter that it was based on a lie? If the joy was genuine, does the truth of its foundation still matter? These questions ripple outward into ethics, into psychology, into metaphysics. They don't resolve, they haunt, and they mirror the deeper question beneath them all. What does it mean to live a good life? Not a happy one, not a successful one, a good one. Is it to avoid pain, to help others, to follow rules, to make beauty, to leave something behind? Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living, but he was sentenced to death for examining too much. Does that mean truth is dangerous, or just inconvenient? If ignorance is bliss and knowledge brings suffering, which is better? Would you rather be a content fool or a tortured sage? There is no right answer, only preference, only temperament, only the quiet war between comfort and clarity. And even clarity doesn't last. Every answer births a deeper question. Every truth comes wrapped in a contradiction. And the mind, if honest, must learn to live with that. Must learn to dwell in uncertainty. To find peace not in answers, but in awareness. To see the question mark not as a failure, but as a lantern in the dark. But even if the question mark is a lantern, it still casts shadows. And in those shadows live the questions we're too afraid to ask, the ones that twist in quiet moments when everything else goes still. Like, am I living the life I chose, or the one that happened to me? Was there ever a moment where I truly decided who I am, or have I just been reacting all along, like a leaf caught in currents it cannot name? Free will was supposed to answer that, but it doesn't. It only muddies the water. Because even if we feel free, the mechanics of choice are built on layers we did not select. Genetics, childhood, culture, trauma, fear, instinct. Did the addict choose addiction? Did the coward choose to flee? Did the liar choose to lie? Or was that the only path their nervous system knew how to walk? And if that's true, how can we blame anyone for anything? But if we remove blame, what happens to justice, to accountability, to civilization? Society depends on the illusion of choice. Remove it, and the whole scaffolding begins to shake. And yet science keeps pushing us closer to that collapse. Studies show that judges give harsher sentences before lunch, that eyewitnesses are wrong more often than right, that people obey authority even when it means harming others. The famous Milgram experiment proved that. A man in a lab coat says, "Keep going," and ordinary people press buttons they believe are electrocuting someone in the next room. Not one or two, the majority. And they tremble, they sweat, but they continue, because someone told them to. That's all it takes. So what does that say about morality, about evil? If ordinary people can become instruments of harm so easily, is evil a rare mutation, or just a dormant seed in all of us, waiting for the right soil? Hannah Arendt called it the banality of evil. She saw it in the trial of Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi bureaucrat who organised train schedules for genocide. He wasn't a monster. He was dull, polite, efficient, just following orders. And that's what terrified her. That evil doesn't always wear horns. Sometimes it wears a tie. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it's you when you justify something you once swore you'd never do. And if that's true, then the line between good and evil is not between people. It runs through each of us. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that. And if the line is inside us, how do we live with that? How do we forgive ourselves for what we've done, or for what we were capable of, even if we didn't act? What is forgiveness anyway? Is it release? Is it weakness? Is it reconciliation or surrender? Can you forgive someone who isn't sorry? Should you? Or does forgiveness let them off too easy? These questions tangle around history, politics, family, around trauma passed like heirlooms, around wounds that don't bleed but still hurt, around apologies that never came, and the silence that grew in their place. So many people carry pain that isn't theirs, inherited, imposed, swallowed, and never spat out, and still they're expected to function, to smile, to move on. But what does moving on mean when the past hasn't left? What does healing mean if the damage is permanent? Is healing a return to wholeness? Or is it learning to live with the fracture? And if you never return to who you were, is that loss or transformation? Some say time heals, but sometimes time just teaches how to pretend, to smile on cue, to speak without crying, to laugh at things that once broke you. And maybe that's strength, or maybe that's just exhaustion. The philosopher Nietzsche said, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." But that isn't always true. Sometimes it makes us bitter, or numb, or quiet in a way that never recovers. And then we ask, what is strength? Is it endurance? Is it vulnerability? Is it silence in the face of chaos, or the courage to scream when it's needed? Sometimes strength looks like leaving. Sometimes it looks like staying. Sometimes it looks like crying in the shower and still showing up for work the next day. And sometimes it looks like falling apart without shame. But we rarely reward that kind of strength. We reward masks, composure, efficiency. We reward those who bury their pain under productivity, who pretend well, who don't disturb the room. But what if disturbing the room is the only honest act left? What if being well-adjusted to a broken world is not sanity, but submission? The poet R.D. Laing wrote, "Insanity is a sane response to an insane world." So maybe the question isn't how to be normal, but how to remain human in a world that profits off our disconnection, off our numbness, off our need to belong. And this brings us to another impossible question. What is society for? Is it to protect us, control us, free us, use us? Does it reflect who we are or who we're afraid to be? Every rule, every institution, every cultural norm is built on agreements, many of which were made long before any of us were born. Agreements about money, gender, success, beauty, worth. And most people never question them. They just inherit them, perform them, enforce them, until someone breaks them, and then we decide whether to punish or to change. But change is slow, and memory is short, and comfort is seductive. So often the system wins, not because it is just, but because it is familiar. And familiarity feels like truth, like safety, even when it isn't. And so we ask, what does it mean to be free? Is freedom the absence of constraint, or the presence of purpose? Is it doing whatever you want, or wanting something worth doing? Is a monk free? Is a billionaire? Is a prisoner who has made peace with himself freer than a man chasing validation in a suit? And what if freedom is just another story, told to keep us compliant? You're free to choose, they say, but only from the menu you're given, only from the options you can afford, only from the identities that won't get you hurt. So is that really freedom, or just a gilded cage? And if freedom requires risk and risk invites pain, do most people really want to be free? Or do they want comfort disguised as liberty? Control disguised as choice? And then comes the most dangerous question of all. What would happen if we stopped pretending? If we stopped performing? If we lived as if our lives were our own? Would the world collapse, or would it begin? And yet, even if the world did begin, even if we tore off the masks and let the truth breathe through the cracks, there would still be one more haunting question waiting in the dark. Who gets to decide what is true? Not just scientifically or factually, but existentially, emotionally, socially? What truths are allowed to exist, and which are buried beneath the noise of power? Because not all truths are equal. Some truths are dangerous. Some truths unsettle the foundations we stand on. And the history of humanity is filled with examples of what happens when someone dares to say a truth too early. Socrates was poisoned for it. Galileo silenced. Hypatia torn apart in the street. Even today, the whistleblower is punished more harshly than the crime they expose. So we ask, why are some truths feared? Is it because they challenge what is sacred, or because they expose what is fragile? Truth has never been a neutral thing. It is a weapon, a mirror, a flame, and depending on who holds it, it can liberate or destroy. But the problem with truth is that it is often filtered through belief, and belief is sticky, slippery, irrational. A person will go to war to defend an idea they cannot explain. They will abandon loved ones over dogmas they never chose. Belief gives meaning, but it also blinds. It comforts, but it also cages. And the mind clings to it, not because it is true, but because it is familiar. Because the alternative, uncertainty, is too much to bear. Cognitive dissonance theory shows this. When faced with evidence that contradicts a deeply held belief, people often double down rather than change. It's not logic at play, it's identity. Because to lose a belief is to lose a part of oneself. And so the next question arises, what is the cost of being right? And is it worth it? If the truth alienates you from your community, your family, your peace, should you still speak it? Is silence complicity? Or is silence wisdom? And who decides? There are no easy answers, only tensions. And those tensions play out in every conversation, every institution, every algorithm that decides what appears on a screen and what disappears. We are not fed truth, we are fed what aligns with our cliques, our past, our tribe. And in that echo chamber, the illusion of certainty grows louder. Truth becomes whatever is repeated. Familiarity breeds belief. The illusory truth effect shows that the more often we hear something, the more likely we are to accept it as true, even if it's false. So is belief about accuracy or exposure? And if so, who controls exposure and why? In a world where truth is curated, edited, trimmed, rebranded and sold, what does it mean to know anything at all? This brings us to epistemology, the study of knowledge. But knowledge is not just data, it is relationship. It is context. It is meaning. And meaning is where things get slippery. A rock is a rock, but to one person, it is a weapon. To another, a memory. To another, a piece of art. So which is true? All of them? None of them. Nietzsche once said, "There are no facts, only interpretations." But that scares people, because if everything is interpretation, then what can be trusted? And if nothing can be trusted, how do we live? How do we love? How do we govern? That question haunted Foucault. He saw that power and knowledge were deeply intertwined. That what we call truth is often just the language of the dominant group. That madness, for example, is not a medical category, but a social one, decided by who has the authority to define sanity. And so truth becomes a question of perspective. But not all perspectives are equal either. Some come from lived experience, others from privilege, some from survival, others from distance. So how do we navigate this sea of voices, each claiming truth, each shaped by pain or power or pride? Is there a higher ground, or is everything relative? If morality is relative, can we judge? If culture is relative, can we criticize? If identity is relative, can we know who we are? These questions matter because they shape how we act, how we vote, how we treat strangers, how we build laws and break them. And even if we decide that some truths are universal, like justice or dignity or compassion, we must still ask, why are they so often ignored? Why do people commit horrors in the name of love, or peace, or God? Is it because those words are just masks, stretched over older urges? Greed, fear, domination? Or is it because meaning itself can be hijacked? The same word, freedom, can justify both revolution and oppression. The same word, faith, can inspire both mercy and violence. So words are not enough, motive matters. And even motive can be hidden, especially from ourselves. Jung believed that much of human behavior is shaped by the unconscious, by archetypes, instincts, shadows we cannot see. So even when we believe we are acting nobly, we may be acting out an ancient script. A need to belong, a fear of abandonment, a hunger for control. And if we cannot see these scripts, can we be blamed for following them? Or does awareness bring responsibility? Does knowing the puppet strings make us more accountable or more trapped? Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose. But how wide is that space really? And what if that space has already been shaped by trauma, by programming, by biology? These are not excuses, they're questions. Questions meant to soften judgment, to deepen empathy, to remind us that the line between hero and villain is often thinner than we like to admit. So thin, in fact, that sometimes the same person can be both, in different moments, in different stories. So who are we then? A sum of our contradictions? A collage of masks? A flicker of awareness in a body we don't fully control? And if the self is a fiction, does that make life meaningless or more precious? Like a dream we only get to visit once, knowing it will end. Perhaps that's all this is. A strange, brief dream, filled with impossible questions, beautiful questions, questions that do not close, but open, like windows in the dark. And yet for all the windows we try to open, the air never quite clears, because behind every question about truth or love or freedom, there waits the deeper ache, the question of identity itself, the shifting mask we mistake for a face, the fragile, flickering illusion of a fixed self, a me we believe in so completely that we say it with certainty. I am this, I am that, I know who I am, but what if none of it is solid? What if the self is just a story, a convenient summary of patterns and roles and memories told so many times? It starts to feel real, even though memory itself is stitched with error and longing, and selective silence, even though roles change and patterns break, and the stories we once told about who we were unravel in the quiet without warning. What then? What is the self when stripped of biography and name? When stripped of job, title, relationship, nationality, gender, ideology, stripped of every label the world has offered and we have accepted, often without question? What remains then, when the words fall away and the roles dissolve? Is there anything underneath, or is the self just a temporary bundle of sensation and thought, like foam on water, flickering, forming, dissolving again, always in motion, always pretending it is fixed, because the idea of being no one is terrifying. And yet Buddhist thought tells us exactly that the self is an illusion, a fiction clung to out of ignorance, and that liberation begins not with discovering who you are, but with realizing you were never that to begin with. But Western philosophy has not always agreed. Descartes began with the self, I think therefore I am, but he assumed a thinker, a fixed observer behind the thoughts, while David Hume, centuries later, examined his own mind and found only a stream, a succession of impressions. Never a self, never a solid observer, only flickers, and in that flickering he could not find the I Descartes held so dear. So which is it? Am I the thinker of thoughts, or just the thoughts themselves passing through? And if there is no fixed self, who suffers, who chooses, who regrets, who dreams, who remembers, and can anything truly belong to someone who doesn't exist in the way we assume? Does grief make sense? Does guilt? Does pride? Does ownership? If the self is just an event, not an entity, what happens to everything built upon it? Laws, names, responsibility, relationships, and even memory, which we treat as sacred, is fragile. The neuroscience is clear. Memory is not a recording, but a reconstruction. Each time we recall something, we alter it. The act of remembering is also the act of rewriting, and the older a memory is, the more likely it is wrong. Not because we lie, but because the mind edits, smooths, corrects, fills in gaps. So what do we really know about ourselves? If the story we remember is a mosaic of partial truths stitched with hope and fear, and if memory shifts and identity shifts and context shifts, is the self just a performance shaped by the audience? Am I different alone than I am with you? Am I different now than I was then? And if so, which version is the real one? Or are they all real or none? And if there is no real me, then who dies? And if no one dies, is death still real? Or just the end of a performance, the curtain falling on a play where the actor was never separate from the role? And what does that mean for morality, for forgiveness, for love, for loss? If the person who hurt me no longer exists, or never existed in the way I imagined, can I still blame them? Or is the one I blame a phantom, stitched from my own memory, my own pain? And if the person I loved was only ever a version in my mind, do I grieve them or myself? And when I say I with such certainty, what am I actually referring to? This voice, this body, this breath, this string of thoughts that come and go, and who is watching them? Is there a watcher, or just watching? Just awareness without identity? And if that is true, if consciousness is impersonal, then what is the difference between my awareness and yours? Are we different drops of water, or the same ocean seen through different windows? And if we are the same, why do we feel so separate? Why does the body draw such thick lines around the self? And if those lines are illusions, why do they hurt so much when crossed? And what about pain? Physical, emotional, psychic. Is pain real if the self is not? Or is pain the only thing that convinces us we are real? Descartes might have said, "I think, therefore I am." But what if the truth is I hurt, therefore I believe? And if belief is rooted in pain, then perhaps all philosophy begins not in wonder, but in ache, in the need to make sense of something unbearable, in the need to assign meaning where there may be none, and still. We ask, what is the self? Because even if we accept it is not fixed, not solid, not real in the way we imagine, it still matters, because we must live, and living requires some kind of anchor, even if that anchor is just temporary, just symbolic, and maybe that's all the self needs to be, not truth, but a useful fiction, a scaffold to build meaning upon, knowing full well it may not last, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the beauty is not in finding something eternal, but in dancing with the impermanent, the uncertain, the flickering self that changes shape with each breath, each conversation, each loss, each night that passes while we lie awake asking questions no one can answer, and listening for echoes that sound like our own voice, but older, deeper, quieter, as if someone else has lived this before, and left the question behind like a breadcrumb, not to solve, but to follow. And still the breadcrumb trail goes on, winding deeper into the forest of unanswerable things, of strange thoughts whispered too late at night when the air feels heavier than it should. And the mind becomes a labyrinth of soft contradictions, and among them is this quiet question, the one that hums beneath every theory, every story, every fragile act of meaning-making. What is time really? Not measured time, not calendars or clocks, but the felt thing, the lived experience that stretches and bends and disappears entirely when we lose ourselves, or suffer, or wait. The way a moment can feel endless, and a decade can vanish into the folds of a single memory. And yet we act as if time is fixed, as if the past is gone, and the future is not yet. But where is the past now, really? Where did it go? And if it is truly gone, why can it still hurt, still change us, still define who we think we are? And what about the future, that strange flickering phantom we project our fears and hopes into, building plans and dreams and expectations onto something that doesn't yet exist and may never exist? So what is it we are really chasing when we chase the future? Is it control? Is it escape? Is it the illusion that life has a shape, a direction, a purpose? But purpose itself is slippery, and so is memory, and both are built on time. And yet physics tells us that time is not a river, but a dimension, that past and future may exist simultaneously. Like pages in a book, we can only read one line at a time. And if that's true, then what is the present? What is now even real, or just a flicker between the echo and the guess? And if everything that has happened still exists, and everything that will happen already exists, are we just passengers on a track we cannot see? And if so, can anything be changed? Can anything be chosen? Or is free will just another name for blindness? Like a dream that feels real while we're in it, but fades when we try to grasp it, and how strange that time feels so solid in the moment, but dissolves in retrospect, that sometimes a memory from childhood feels closer than a conversation from last week, that the mind does not arrange things chronologically, but emotionally, symbolically, sometimes irrationally, sometimes with an ache so precise it feels like time travel, like standing in two moments at once. And if we can carry the past inside us alive and aching, then where do we truly live? Is it now, or is it then? Or is it somewhere in between, in the space where memory and desire blur together? And maybe that's all the present is, a negotiation between who we've been and who we hope to be. But even hope is a trick of time, a reaching towards something that cannot be guaranteed, and sometimes hope becomes a weight, a quiet violence we do to ourselves when we cannot accept what is, and so we run forward, trying to outrun regret or loss or emptiness, as if the future will make up for the past, but the past does not dissolve. It nests inside us, grows strange roots, shows up in our reactions, our silence, our habits, the things we fear without knowing why. And if the past is not past and the future is not real, and the present is just a breath slipping through our fingers, then what is life built on? Is it all just a sequence of illusions timed well enough to create the feeling of continuity? The way a film is just still frames played fast enough to feel like motion? And if so, who is watching the film? Who is the viewer behind the eyes, the one who says, "my life and my time," as if it belonged to someone? But the self is not fixed, and time is not fixed, and maybe the two are just dancing shadows on the same wall. Neither real, but both necessary, because without time, there is no change. And without change, there is no story. And without story, how could we survive the vastness of being? How could we wake up and do anything at all? And maybe that's the point. Maybe time is not real in the strict sense, but it is useful. It gives the formless form. It gives the infinite a shape we can walk through, a shape that lets us love and lose, and remember, and hope, and ache. Because even if time is an illusion, the illusion still hurts. And if it hurts, it matters. And maybe that's all reality is. Whatever hurts us or heals us or haunts us, whatever leaves an imprint, and time leaves an imprint, it leaves it in the mirror, in the faces of those we once knew, in the spaces where laughter used to live, in the creases of a letter never sent, in the feeling of arriving too late or too early, never quite at the right moment, always just missing something, and that ache is universal. The ache of misaligned time, of people growing apart, not from malice but from momentum, from the fact that our clocks tick differently, that two people can love each other deeply and still be wrong for each other because they're at different moments of their lives, and no amount of love can reconcile that gap. Because time is cruel that way. It doesn't pause for passion or poetry or promises. It moves, indifferent, and yet we keep trying to catch it, to save it, to spend it wisely, as if it were money. But money can be earned, time cannot, and yet we trade time for money every day, knowing we can never buy the time back. And maybe that's the greatest irony of all, that we sacrifice the one thing we cannot replace for things that don't last. And we do it willingly, every day, telling ourselves we have time. We have time until we don't. Until we look back and realise we were always living in memory or in hope, and rarely in presence. And so we ask, what would it mean to truly live now? Not in theory, but in practice, to meet the moments without distraction or resistance, or the need to make it different, to let now be enough. But even that is a paradox, because to try to be present is already a future-oriented goal. So we chase presence and lose it in the act of chasing. And maybe that's the point. Maybe presence is not something we attain, but something we remember for a moment, like a scent on the wind, like a sound at dusk, like a heartbeat slowing in the dark. And then it's gone again, and we are back to chasing. And maybe that's what it means to be human, to live between moments, always reaching, always remembering, always asking, always almost here. And perhaps that's why we keep asking questions we know have no answer, because the asking itself becomes a kind of presence, a kind of ritual, a way to keep ourselves company in the dark, because silence is loud and certainty is brittle, and somewhere between those two we find the pulse of wonder, the reason we stare at ceilings at 2 a.m. and ask things like, what would it mean to matter? Not just to others, but to the universe, to existence itself, to the void we were thrown into without asking, is there such a thing as cosmic meaning? Or is that just human projection, a story we tell so we don't unravel completely? And if the universe doesn't care, does that make it cruel or free or beautiful in its indifference? And if we don't matter to the stars, can we still matter to each other? And is that enough? Is small meaning still real meaning? And what does it mean to say something matters anyway? Mattering is not a scientific category. It's emotional. It's spiritual. It's a weight we assign to something because it moves us, because it changes us, because it lingers when it's gone. And maybe that's all mattering is, a thing that leaves a trace, and we all want to leave a trace, don't we? Some fingerprint on the fabric of the world that says, we were here, we lived, we loved, we broke and got back up. We tried, and maybe that's why people create, why they write, paint, build, parent, even why they destroy, because destruction is also a way to leave a mark, a cry for mattering twisted by pain. And if no one sees the mark, did it still happen? If a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, not only does it make a sound, it rots, it feeds the soil, it becomes something else. So maybe mattering doesn't require witnesses. Maybe mattering is quieter than we think. Maybe it's the way a stranger remembers your kindness a decade later, and you'll never know. Maybe it's the way your sorrow taught you gentleness, and that gentleness softened someone else's rage without either of you realizing. Maybe mattering is mostly invisible, and that's why it's hard to believe in, because we look for signs, for applause, for evidence. And the truth is, most meaning leaves no monument, only a shift, a softening, a moment where someone chose not to break something because of something they once felt. And yet we keep trying to measure it, to name it, to build systems for it. And those systems, religion, legacy, art, fame, achievement, are they reflections of meaning or replacements for it? And does anything we do outlast us in a way that truly matters? The pyramids still stand, but the people who built them are dust. And for all their grandeur, we still don't understand their purpose. Maybe they were tombs, maybe they were messages, maybe they were just the result of someone needing to prove they existed, to fight the decay of time, to scream into eternity with stone instead of voice. And what about love? Is love the answer to mattering? Is love the only thing that makes existence bearable? Or is that another illusion, another trick of the brain, a survival mechanism misread as destiny? But even if love is a trick, it's a beautiful one. And maybe beauty itself is what saves us, even when it can't be explained, even when it doesn't last. Maybe beauty is the only thing that redeems the chaos, not because it solves it, but because it makes it sing. And yet beauty too is subjective, contextual, fleeting. What moved us once might not move us again. What made us weep in childhood might leave us unmoved in old age. So was it still beautiful? Or is beauty always tied to the observer? And if so, is anything truly beautiful in itself, or only in relationship? And if meaning, love, beauty are all relational, not intrinsic, does anything have value alone? Or is value itself an illusion built from connection? And if so, what happens when we are alone? Really alone, cut off from those relationships? Does value vanish? Do we vanish, or does something remain? Some inner flame, some core that says I am, I exist, even if no one sees me. And if that flame exists, is that soul? Is that consciousness? Is that the divine? Or just a trick of self-preservation, a stubborn refusal to disappear? And yet that refusal has shaped everything. Every book, every cathedral, every revolution, every whispered confession in the dark, all built on the need to say, I exist and that must mean something. But what if it doesn't? What if existence just is, without meaning, without story, without judgment? And we're the ones painting faces on the clouds, reading messages in the stars, inventing purpose like children invent games. And maybe that's not wrong. Maybe that's sacred. Maybe the very act of inventing meaning is what makes us human. And maybe being human means accepting both. Truths at once, that there may be no reason and yet we live as if there is. That we are dust and also stars, temporary and yet luminous, brief and yet aware of the brevity. And maybe that awareness is the gift, the curse, the unbearable paradox of sentience, to know that we end, and to still choose to begin, again and again, to wake up and make coffee and smile at someone and touch a leaf and feel something stir and not know why, but to feel it anyway, to weep over songs and strangers and small ridiculous things, and to keep going, not because we have answers, but because we have questions. And maybe that's what meaning is. Not a truth to be found, but a question to be lived. And if that's true, then we don't need answers to be whole. We don't need certainty to be sincere. We don't need eternity to be real. We just need the courage to keep asking, to keep walking into the fog with open eyes and a soft heart. And maybe that's what all of this has been. Not a search for conclusions, but a long, quiet walk through a forest of unanswerable things. And maybe the forest is where we're meant to stay. And even within that forest of unanswerable things, the path keeps winding. Not forward, not backward, just deeper, until the trees begin to blur and the ground feels unfamiliar beneath the same feet that have walked it for years, because another question has begun to hum beneath the surface of it all. One so quiet we almost miss it. One so constant it hides in plain sight. What is normal? And who decides? What invisible line separates sanity from madness? The acceptable from the unacceptable? The real from the imagined? Because the mind, strange and soft and electric, is a world unto itself. And sometimes that world splits. Sometimes it stretches too thin. And people fall through the cracks of what society agrees is real. And once you fall, it's hard to climb back. Harder still to be heard without suspicion. Because the label of madness is heavy and sticky and often permanent. But what if madness isn't what we think? What if it's not an enemy of reason, but a different way of seeing? A way too vivid, too loud, too sensitive for a world that rewards numbness and speed. And if someone sees something that isn't there, is it less real than someone seeing something that is there, but interpreting it wrong? Because perception is already flawed, the brain guesses constantly, fills in gaps, smooths edges, edits the world into something it can tolerate. So we're all hallucinating a little, all living in slightly different versions of the same reality. And yet we agree on certain hallucinations. We call those facts. And we call the people who disagree delusional. But where's the line? If someone believes they're being watched and they're wrong, we call it paranoia. But if they're right, we call it awareness. And what about culture? There are places where talking to ancestors is sacred and normal. But in the wrong context, it's a symptom of psychosis. So is madness context? Is it culture? Is it timing? And what does that mean for identity, for autonomy, for truth? Because the history of psychiatry is filled with cruelty disguised as care, filled with locked doors and broken spirits, and yet people still suffer, and suffering is real, and the mind can break or seem to. And when it does, who decides how to fix it? And should it be fixed or understood or both? And what if the thing we call a disorder is a reasonable response to an unreasonable world? What if depression isn't just brain chemistry, but grief for a life unlived? What if anxiety isn't irrational, but prophetic? What if dissociation is a skill, a survival tool forged in fire? And when we call these things illness, what are we really saying? That they don't fit, that they scare us, that they make things inconvenient, but inconvenient for who and why? And does healing mean returning to normal or creating a new way to be? And can we ever separate the person from the diagnosis? Or does the label become the identity? Does it help or limit? Does it free or trap? And what about the philosopher who spirals into madness? Like Nietzsche, whose final years were spent in silence, in shadows. And was that breakdown a loss or a transformation? Was it the cost of staring too deeply into things most people avoid? Or was it just illness, random and cruel? And why are we so afraid of that loss of coherence, of becoming unrecognizable even to ourselves? Because maybe the deepest fear isn't death, but madness. The fear of losing our reflection, our sense of who we are. And yet many who've fallen into that space speak of insight, of clarity, of beauty too bright to hold. So what do we do with that? Do we listen or dismiss? And who decides what's real? Because the DSM grows longer every year, cataloguing grief and difference and sadness into disorders. And while some find help, others find cages, and the line between medicine and control begins to blur. And if the state can define sanity, it can also use that definition to silence, to disappear, to erase dissent under the name of help. And this has happened over and over, from the Soviet gulags to Victorian asylums, to children given pills for being bored in school, and women told their emotions are diseases, and men punished for crying. So where do we draw the line between help and harm? And is it possible to heal without pathologizing, to witness pain without naming it a problem? And what if the mind isn't a machine to be fixed, but a garden to be tended, wild and strange and full of things we don't understand? And maybe it grows best when we stop trying to control every branch, when we stop pruning the wild parts and start asking why they grew that way in the first place. And maybe madness isn't the opposite of reason, but its echo, distorted by sorrow or silence or neglect. And maybe some truths are only visible when the mind fractures, when the masks fall away and the raw self speaks. And maybe we don't need to understand it fully to respect it. Maybe awe is enough, because the mind is vast and its edges are not clean. And when someone falls into that space, into the unnameable, the unknowable, we could ask not just what's wrong, but what happened, what hurt, what dream was lost, what part of them tried to protect the rest by breaking. And maybe that's what we miss, that the break is not always failure. Sometimes it's strategy, sometimes it's the only way out. And maybe recovery isn't about going back, but going forward with more gentleness, with more room for difference, with more space for the parts that don't make sense, because not everything has to make sense to be real, and not everything broken wants to be fixed. And maybe the real madness is pretending we all fit into the same frame, the same speed, the same version of the world. And maybe it's okay not to. Maybe it's okay to be strange, to feel too much, to see what others can't. And if we could learn to hold that, to welcome it, maybe fewer people would break, maybe fewer would fall, or maybe when they did, they'd find a hand reaching down, not to pull them back, but to sit with them in the dark until the shape of the night changed. And still the questions keep blooming, not like flowers, but like fungus, quiet, persistent, growing in the hidden damp corners of thought. And now the air seems to ask something even stranger, something uncomfortably close. Who would one be if no one was watching, not just in the physical sense, but in the deeper, haunting sense of identity? Because how much of who we are is shaped by the mirrors around us, by the eyes that expect, that reflect, that judge, that confirm. And if those eyes disappeared, would the self collapse, or expand, or change entirely? And how much of any personality is performance, curated subtly over time, learned through imitation and reward and punishment? The child smiles and is praised, the teenager rebels and is labelled, the adult conforms and is trusted. But beneath all of that is there something untouched, some essence, that isn't for show? And if so, how would we find it? How would we know it? Or is the self always relational, always refracted through others? Because language itself is a tool of the tribe, and thoughts come in language. So how can one think purely, independently, outside the shapes carved by culture and history? And yet we feel like individuals, we feel singular, unique, special, but every taste, every reaction, every opinion might be the echo of someone else's influence. And maybe that's not a flaw, maybe it's the nature of being human, to be porous, to absorb, to mimic. But it raises the question, if a person were born into a void, no mirrors, no voices, no names, would they still be someone? And what kind of someone? Or would they be like water without a container, present but formless? And if that's true, then every identity is a kind of artifact, a fossil of interaction, and that can be comforting, but also unsettling, because it means we are not fixed, not stable, not original in the way we imagine, and yet we cling to identity as if it were sacred. We say, I am this, I am not that, and we build walls around those declarations, defend them, even die for them. But what are we defending, really? A story, a mask, a name, and the name is given before we understand it. The role is assigned before we can resist, and by the time we can question it, it's already in our bones, shaping our choices, our fears, our desires, and even rebellion is often scripted, anticipated, absorbed into the system. It's trying to escape, and if that's the case, is true authenticity possible? Or just a noble illusion? And how would one even measure authenticity? Is it the feeling of being unobserved, of acting without agenda? But even in solitude, the imagined gaze of others lingers. The internalized audience, the voice that asks what would they think? And so we perform even alone, adjusting our own posture in the mirror, narrating our lives as if someone were reading along, and that voice never quite leaves. And some philosophers call that the superego, others call it conscience. But maybe it's just the price of language, the cost of consciousness, to always be doubled, split between being and observing, doing and watching ourselves do. And what would freedom look like without that split? Would it be bliss or madness? Would it be animal or divine? And is that why we admire children and fear the mad? Because both seem unfiltered, unobserved, raw in a way we've forgotten how to be? And yet we also find that chaos terrifying, because it reminds us how fragile the self is, how easily it can dissolve without the stabilizing weight of others. And maybe that's why solitude, real solitude, not just being alone but being unseen, is so hard to bear, because it puts us face to face with that formlessness, that absence of confirmation, and we begin to question, am I anything at all without you, without the role you assign me, the expectation you hold? And some people escape into performance to avoid that emptiness, while others chase it. Monks in caves, mystics in deserts, artists on the brink, all trying to touch something unmediated, something pure. But purity is dangerous too. It burns, it blinds, and few return unchanged, because to see oneself without the filters of society is to see both the glory and the horror, the angel and the animal, the truth and the void. And maybe that's what makes humans so strange. We want to be known, but not fully. We want to be free, but only in ways that feel safe. We want to be ourselves, but we fear what we might find. And so we live in masks, we forget. Our masks, and sometimes the mask fits so well, we think it's our face. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that's necessary. Maybe survival requires some performance. But what happens when the mask no longer serves? When the identity begins to choke? When the story becomes a cage and we long to rewrite ourselves? But rewriting is hard when every page has already been read by others, when every word echoes with memory. And maybe that's why some people disappear, not physically but emotionally, psychologically. They vanish into themselves, withdraw from roles they no longer believe in, grow silent where they once spoke, because they can't reconcile the person they are with the person they're expected to be. And maybe that's not weakness, maybe that's the beginning of something honest, and maybe identity isn't a fixed point but a question, an unfolding, a slow remembering of something older than language, something felt but not named. And maybe we are all just trying to find a way back to that place, through music, through solitude, through dreams, through those rare moments when the performance drops and something real flickers through. And we recognize ourselves not in what we do, but in what moves us, what breaks us, what calls to us with no reason. And maybe that's the soul, not a thing, but a direction, a pull, a longing. And if we follow it, not toward a fixed self, but toward a deeper awareness, then maybe we become not who we are, but who we are becoming. And that becoming is messy and never complete and full of contradictions. And that's okay. Maybe that's beautiful, because it means we are never done, never trapped, never entirely known. And maybe being unknown, even to ourselves, is not a flaw, but a freedom we've yet to learn how to live with. And maybe the strangest part of all is not the question of who we are, but when we are, because time, that silent force threading through every breath, is not as solid as it seems. It flows but not evenly. It passes but not fairly. It bends in memory, distorts in dreams, and slips away in ways that leave us dizzy and uncertain, because the clock may tick steadily, but the mind does not. And time as we live, it is not measured in seconds but in moments, in losses, in waiting rooms, in kisses, in silence. And we all feel it differently, stretched in grief, compressed in joy, stagnant in boredom. And if time feels so elastic, what is it really? Is it just change, entropy, a direction toward disorder? Or is it an illusion, a trick of perception, a story told by our nervous system to make sense of motion? And if it's a story, who's writing it? And if it's real, then why does it feel so unreal? Because science tells us the past and future might be equally real, equally present in some grand structure. We just can't see a block universe where every moment is fixed, where free will is just a feeling, and yet we act as though the future is open and the past is behind us. We act as though our choices carve new paths, but what if they don't? What if every decision we make has already been made and we're just playing it out like characters reading a script we didn't write? And if that's true, can we still be responsible? Can we still be moral? Because morality depends on choice. And if choice is an illusion, what becomes of guilt, of justice, of redemption? And yet we feel choice, we feel regret, and feelings don't lie, they mislead, they exaggerate, but they point to something real. And maybe time isn't a line but a loop. Maybe we're living the same life over and over, as Nietzsche once wondered, eternal recurrence, every pain and joy repeating forever. And if that were true, would it change how we live? Would we be kinder, braver, more honest, or would we give in to despair? And what does it mean that some cultures view time as circular and others as linear? That some measure their lives in seasons and rituals, not deadlines and digits? And how has our idea of time shaped our souls, our stress, our speed? Because we worship efficiency now, productivity, hustle, and we treat rest as laziness, slowness, as failure. But for most of history, time was marked by the sun and the stars and the harvest, not by alarms and meetings and endless scrolling. And maybe we've lost something in this race, some rhythm, some softness, some deep connection to the present that only emerges when there's nowhere to be and nothing to win. And what if the present is the only thing that's real? As some spiritual traditions suggest, what if the past is memory and the future is imagination, and all we ever truly have is now? This breath, this sound, this light on the wall, and yet we spend so little time in now. We leap constantly forward or backward. We replay what can't be changed and rehearse what hasn't happened. And that's not weakness, that's being human, but it costs us something. And what if mindfulness isn't a wellness trend, but a rebellion, a radical act of presence in a world addicted to elsewhere? And what about death, the final punctuation mark of time? Is it the end or a doorway? And does it come too soon or always right on time? And why do some people fear it while others embrace it? And how do we live knowing it waits for us all? Sometimes patiently, sometimes suddenly. And does knowing we die make life more precious or more absurd? Camus thought the absurd was not a problem to solve, but a condition to live within. That life's lack of ultimate meaning doesn't diminish it but sharpens it, demands that we choose to live anyway, and maybe time is what makes that choice possible. Because without time there is no change, and without change there is no growth, no art, no healing, no becoming, and even if time hurts us, even if it steals our youth and carries away our loved ones and makes every joy temporary, it also delivers us to new versions of ourselves, to unexpected beauty, to forgiveness, to love, to wisdom, and maybe time is both the wound and the balm, the thief and the teacher, and maybe we don't need to understand it to honour it. Maybe we just need to feel its weight, its flow, to notice how it gathers in corners, how it rushes when we're afraid and lingers when we're in pain. And what if our job is not to master time, but to befriend it, to walk beside it rather than chase or flee it? And what if eternity isn't endless time, but timelessness? The still point in the turning world, the place beyond measurement, where being just is, and if that's true, maybe we touch eternity, not after death, but in moments of awe, of surrender, of deep love, where everything stops and the self dissolves and time loses its teeth. And if those moments are rare, maybe that's what makes them holy. Maybe we live entire lives for a few seconds of true presence. And maybe that's enough. Maybe time doesn't owe us more than that. And maybe what matters isn't how much time we have, but what we notice, what we cherish, what we remember. And memory too is strange. Not a filing cabinet, but a shifting mosaic, influenced by mood, by story, by repetition. And who are we without memory? If time shapes identity, then what happens when memory fades? In dementia, in trauma, in age? And is a person still a person when they no longer remember their name, their history, their people? Or are we just the sum of what we can recall? And if so, how fragile we are, and how miraculous that we hold anything at all. And maybe that's why we tell stories, to preserve time, to bottle it, to give it meaning. And maybe that's what this whole project is. This video, this voice, these words, an attempt to hold something fleeting before it slips away again. And then the whisper returns, quieter now, like a breeze passing over still water, asking not what is time, or self, or truth, but something simpler, stranger, more intimate. What is good and how do we know? Because the word is soft and familiar, but slippery when held. And what one calls good, another calls evil. And history is filled with both. Dressed in each other's clothing, crusades launched in the name of virtue, genocides justified by ideals, and even small everyday acts are tangled in ambiguity. A lie to protect, a theft to survive, a kindness born of guilt and morality. For all its authority, bends beneath context, shifts with culture, and yet we cling to it, needing some compass to steer the chaos. But what if the compass is cracked or worse, spinning freely? And still we follow it, because we must, because without some sense of right and wrong. The world dissolves into noise, and some say morality comes from God, written in sacred texts, eternal and fixed. But then why do the texts contradict each other? And why do believers still disagree? And some say it comes from reason, from logic, like Kant, who believed we must treat others as ends, never means, a noble rule but hard to follow. And others say morality is feeling, empathy, a gut reaction to suffering, but feelings deceive, and empathy can be biased. And others say it's evolution, a social glue shaped by survival. But then why do we die for strangers, sacrifice for ideas? And if morality is just a trick of genes, does that make it meaningless? And what of moral progress? If we look back, we see slavery condemned, rights expanded, cruelty named and shamed. But who decides which way is forward? And is progress real or just fashion? And when two sides claim the moral high ground, who gets to judge? And what about the trolley problem? The classic riddle where one must choose who lives and who dies, and the mind resists, wants a way out. A better answer, because deep down we fear the cost of choosing, the cost of being wrong. And maybe that's what morality really is, a burden, not a code, a weight we carry because we care, because we know we affect others, and some live by rules, others by consequences, and both can fail. And what's good for one may be bad for many, and vice versa. And how does one measure harm or benefit? And can intentions redeem outcomes, or are outcomes all that matter? And what about forgiveness? Is it moral to let go of justice? Or does forgiveness betray the victim? And who deserves mercy? And who decides? And when is violence justified, if ever? And what about war, where murder becomes duty, and civilians become numbers, and medals are given for acts that would be crimes in any other setting? And does morality bend to necessity? Or is it stronger than fear? And what of people who do evil but believe they're doing good? The inquisitors, the ideologues, the tyrants who sleep soundly. And what of the good who do nothing, who stay silent in the face of wrong? Are they moral or merely comfortable? And what of those who sacrifice themselves? The ones who give up everything for a principle. Are they heroes or fools? And what principle is worth dying for? And is it moral to die for truth, for beauty, for love? Or is morality only about others, about not causing harm? And can one be good without being kind, or kind without being good? And what if goodness is not a state but a struggle, not something one has but something one chases, imperfectly, endlessly, like Sisyphus pushing the stone, not because he'll succeed, but because stopping would be worse? And maybe that's what being moral is, choosing to try again and again in a world where answers shift, where clarity is rare, where every decision leaves someone in pain. And maybe the best we can do is notice, is care, is stay awake. And maybe the real danger isn't moral failure, but moral sleep. When we stop questioning, stop feeling, stop being disturbed by injustice, and start believing that our way is the only way, and that others are just wrong, and that certainty is a virtue. Because it's not. It's a vice dressed as confidence, and the truly moral are not always certain. They're often unsure, torn, humbled by complexity, and yet they choose, knowing they might be wrong. And maybe that's what courage really is, not boldness, but responsibility, the willingness to carry the weight of choice, knowing it could crush. And maybe goodness is not about being right, but being open to feedback, to change, to difference. And maybe it's not about rules at all, but about relationship, how we meet the other, the stranger, the enemy, the weak. And if we can see them not as means, not as obstacles, but as ends in themselves, maybe then we begin to approach the good, even if we never fully grasp it, and maybe that's enough. Not to know, but to seek, not to be good, but to try. And maybe the most dangerous people are the ones who think they already are, who believe their morality is complete because completion breeds cruelty, the kind that smiles while it punishes, the kind that never doubts, and doubt, strange as it sounds, might be the beginning of morality, because it makes space for the other, for the unknown. And if goodness is anything, maybe it's that space, that pause before we act, that question before we judge, that ache we feel when someone suffers, even if we don't understand why. And maybe the good is not a thing we find, but a path we walk, one that winds and twists and leads us into places we didn't expect. And maybe it doesn't end. Maybe it's the walking that matters, the willingness to continue, to listen, to learn, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. And if so, then maybe morality isn't a destination, but a direction, a compass we check and recheck, knowing it might be wrong, but needing it anyway, because without it, we are lost. And now we reach the softest, strangest question of all, not what is real or what is good or what is time, but something smaller, closer, something that slips beneath all the others and waits in the quiet. Why is there something rather than nothing? And what does it mean to be at all? Because existence itself is the oldest riddle, and no one has ever answered it. Not really, because to explain being with more being is to circle endlessly, like a snake eating its tail. And yet here we are, aware, awake, puzzled by our own presence, and we can't look away. We can't unknow this mystery that something exists, that we are part of it, and the mind tries to make sense, to name a cause, a god, a spark, a quantum fluctuation, a cosmic accident. But every answer only adds more something, and nothing keeps slipping away, refusing to be pinned down. And philosophers like Heidegger called this the foundational question of metaphysics. But most people never ask it, because it's unsettling. It doesn't lead anywhere practical, and yet it haunts quietly, like a low hum behind every thought. And if nothing had existed, no stars, no minds, no time, would that have been better, or worse, or simply nothing? And can we even imagine true nothing? Not emptiness, not silence, but absolute absence. No space, no laws, not even the potential for anything. And if we can't imagine it, can we truly talk about it? Or does every thought already assume something, some stage on which to play? And if existence is inexplicable, then what does that say about meaning? Because meaning needs a context, a purpose, a goal. But what if there is none? What if we are meaning-making machines dropped into an indifferent universe, desperate to create patterns, stories, reasons where there are none? And is that a flaw or a gift? Because even if the cosmos is cold, our stories are warm, our love is real, our pain is sharp, and maybe meaning doesn't have to be given. Maybe it can be chosen, grown like a garden in the void. And Viktor Frankl believed that even in suffering, especially in suffering, one could find meaning, that the will to meaning was more powerful than pleasure or power. And maybe that's how we cope, with art, with kindness, with curiosity, with asking better questions, and maybe the unanswerable ones are the most important, because they keep us human, keep us humble, keep us searching. And what happens to a mind that stops wondering, that accepts too quickly, that trades awe for certainty? And maybe that's the quiet tragedy of adulthood. Not that we grow old, but that we stop asking the questions that used to shake us. And what if childhood isn't just a phase, but a perspective? A kind of raw openness to mystery, to paradox, to wonder. And maybe wisdom is not about knowing more, but about remembering how much we do not know, and embracing that, not fleeing from it. And what if the point is not to solve existence, but to participate in it, fully, reverently, strangely, to live in the questions, as Rilke said, to let them shape us, soften us, to become more comfortable with not knowing. And in that space of not knowing, something beautiful can grow. Compassion, tolerance, humility, because when no one has all the answers, we must listen to each other. And maybe that's the secret thread beneath philosophy, beneath science and religion and story. Not to dominate the mystery, but to dwell in it together, to ask not only what is true, but what is kind, what is worth our time, our attention, our lives, and what is a life well lived, if not a series of moments infused with care, with presence, with a willingness to be changed. And maybe the greatest truths aren't found in logic, but in silence, in the spaces between words, in the eyes of someone who's listening, really listening. And maybe the best answers are not answers at all, but mirrors, reflections that show us something about ourselves. And what if all of this, these questions, this voice, this flicker of thought, what if it's all just one way of saying I was here? I wondered. I tried to see. And isn't that enough? Maybe not to solve the world, but to honour it, to make the darkness a little less silent, the loneliness a little less cold. And if there are no final answers, then let there be better questions, deeper ones, stranger ones. Let them echo through time like music, like prayers, like laughter in the void. And maybe one day, in some future we can't imagine, someone will ask a question that opens everything, or maybe not. Maybe we'll keep circling forever, chasing the tail of truth. And maybe that's beautiful too, because the search itself is sacred. The act of asking is a kind of love, and maybe that's the final secret. Not that the universe answers, but that it allows the question, and in that space, in that shimmering maybe, we become real.